Rina Sawayama is one of those incredibly annoying people who are just unreasonably talented. She's a Cambridge graduate, she's an activist, she models, acts, and of course, makes music. Fantastic music. I was first introduced to her work when a friend of mine sent me Comme des Garçons. I turned it on and I immediately fell in love. The cheeky lyrics, the smooth synth bassline, the seductive beat. From that February on, I hotly anticipated her debut album, Sawayama. This record, as I'll expand on upon later, is an all-time favourite of mine. Easy 10 out of 10, and I gleefully watched on as she continued to make waves within the music industry. She's just debuted in John Wick 4, in which she's awesome in. She changed the rules for the Brit Awards, and I think it's safe to say that she's never been bigger than she is right now. But, and this is an unfortunate but, I felt her follow-up album, Hold the Girl, to be a deeply disappointing experience. Not because of a new sonic direction, a collaboration that went wrong, or a lyrical idea that didn't pan out, but because of how tremendously underwhelming the songwriting is. And it hurts to say that because it's her most introspective and thoughtful record to date. But it sounds like a lame house record from the early 2000s, and not in a fun way. This forms a curious paradox that fascinates as much as it frustrates. Morally, I want to like it, but I can't stand how it sounds aesthetically. So, what do we do when we feel a bit conflicted about something? We make a massive video essay about it. Behold, a monument to my gay autism. I want to take a deep dive into this artist, dissect how they talk about their sense of self, and explore how both of her albums critique nostalgia and how it hurts us. To do that though, we need to take a step back and examine how her auditory identity came into being. This piece will feature frank discussions of trauma in regards to sex, age difference, and racist stereotypes. If that is something that might upset you, but you're still interested in watching this video, please use the time codes provided to skip those parts. Chapter 1, Know Now and Madvilliany. Sawayama is what I like to call a mad villain moment. It represents a fruitful collaboration between two artists at the height of their creative powers. Madvillain, of course, being the duo of rappers and producers MF Doom and Madlib. Their only album is considered to be the greatest underground and abstract hip-hop record ever made. To understand what makes the unity between Rina and her head collaborator Clarence Clarity so interesting, it is necessary that we need to look at these artists apart. Clarence Clarity is one of my favourite producers working today. He's not named after that famous meme, but he sounds like this. The universe unfolds. His 2015 record Know Now is an album about obscenity and hedonism. It pulls from many different genres. The slower-paced tracks have a sultry quality, comparable to contemporary R&B. It has lo-fi production, hyperpop maximalism, and a heavy dose of late 90s nostalgia. This mix alone, the offensive contrast of the sensual past and the ADHD internet age, makes for a really interesting auditory experience. Take, for example, the song Bucktooth Particle Smashers. The track starts in this ethereal soundscape that gives way to this slick synthetic bass line. The soundscape is so thick with noise that it's difficult to make out where one instrument starts and ends. It's like a dream pop nightmare. There is a bizarre contrast in this song, the audacious soundscape and Clarity's shy delivery. He mumbles and slurs his words as if he's embarrassed by what's coming out of his mouth. This delivery is complemented by a lyrical focus on deviance, the song itself being about an incestuous secret the singer has.
You didn't know you'd get infected. Late night, when you crept in, I wouldn't advocate eugenics, but whatever gets you off, incestuous love.
The concept for this song is pretty gross. The incest being described as a kind of STI, but the song is more interested in the nature of desire and how it interacts with shame.
Life without sex is a life without sin.
You can't be good without the ability to be bad. It's kind of like yin and yang. On the chorus, hyperactive synths sparkle over these shameful confessions, representing pleasure and ugliness simultaneously. The song is bookended by a childlike motif, this arpeggio. It sounds like someone playing a xylophone while someone else knocks clapsticks together. It evokes a sense of innocence, primary school music class, which makes it a pretty disturbing choice given the subject matter. I don't think that Clarity is trying to make a grand statement about the nature of childhood sexuality or incest. Instead, he's using this taboo subject to explore the sensations of desire and shame. The whole album feels, at the same time, awkward and sensual, with a soundscape so detailed and lush that it becomes a treat to dissect. Know Now is a brilliant album, but it has one flaw. A teeny tiny flaw. And that's Clarity's limited vocal range. An artist should always be aware of their limitations, and Clarity is very good at hiding that he has a fragile falsetto. He can pull off this shy, quiet style of singing, but if he ever wanted to do something louder, more confident, more brazen, I think that he could certainly mix it, score it, and write it, but singing would be a bit of a problem. Rina Sawayama was born in Japan and grew up in Britain. She studied political science and psychology at Cambridge University. She was in a hip-hop band with Theo of Wolf Alice fame, funnily enough. Both bands pull heavily from the 90s, that's why it's fun. And before releasing her debut EP, she worked for several years doing multiple part-time jobs as a model to save up for her album.
At that point, I was 23, and I didn't want to sign the first deal that came along. And I'm so grateful that I did that. I worked 2 jobs, like, for about 3 years, I want to say. Saved up money, and one of them was modelling.
The track Where You Are was before that, and it is a nostalgic cover of a Jackson 5 song. Where the original was euphoric and innocent, Rina's cover is sensual and seductive, and it shows that Rina has interesting artistic impulses. Where a young Michael Jackson is confident and loud, Rina is shy and reserved. She remixes the order of the verses to play on her own strengths.
What inspires my music? Well, before it used to be a lot of online life, whether it's relationships or whether it's frustrations or whether it's loneliness or whether it's like anxiety, and comparing it to life online.
The two songs sound quite different, but they have an unmistakable DNA. But the only way in which this specific song is remarkable, though, is that it's an early track by a now popular artist. No shade, I couldn't do something anything that's good. Her first version of the song, Tunnel Vision, is more eccentric. It has this neo-soul quality to it with its sleepy rhythms. It retains the shyness of Where You Are, but it has a much stranger musical identity. It feels more like an interlude than a regular song, so of course Rina would retool this track and incorporate it into her debut EP. Sawayama herself clearly has talent and a desire to do strange artsy pop music. She has a degree in political science and a strong knowledge of sociology and psychology. She has the ability to articulate human truths and diagnose systemic problems. But she isn't able to replicate these ideas sonically because she isn't as good as a producer as she is a singer. It's worth noting that she has since gone on to produce most of her own music though. But in the beginning, these two artists were off in their own corners of the internet.
Frost connected her to Clarence Clarity, though it took a while for them to click. The first song he did was Afterlife, and I remember being like, ugh, that's too much. His maximalist tendencies turned out to be a perfect match for Sawayama's instinct too, says Clarity, blow the lid off everything as a performer. Clarity helped her embrace their contrasts. We've got a running theme of face-melting guitar solos that pop up all over the place, and really audacious, ridiculous key changes, he says. That's the kind of stuff we both like, particularly Rina, putting things in places that have no right to be there. In the end, he notes, the most ridiculous idea wins.
Clarity has an idiosyncratic approach to pop music, but he doesn't have the vocal range to satisfy all of his ambitions. Rina has wild artistic impulses, a compelling political message, and a voice to kill for, but at this point in her career she couldn't satisfy those impulses. They both have terminally online elements to their music, they both have nostalgic affections for the same periods of time, but most importantly, they both have a desire to transgress within the same genres. Hyperpop. Chapter 2, Themes and Motifs. We are fortunate enough that Rina is extremely online and open to discussing her creative process. I'm usually opposed to artists just explaining what their art is about because it kills much of the fun inherent in interpretation. But Rina often gives contextual insights that are tremendously useful for interpreting because all of her work is autobiographical in some way. So I plan on using clips of her own words throughout this piece. So comes the debut EP, Rina. the first time collaboration between these two artists. I don't want to spend too much time on this EP because even though it's phenomenal, I desperately need this video to be under 2 hours. But an interesting example to explore what makes their collaboration so exciting is the track Take Me As I Am. Every single day I fight another war. What differentiates this song from either artist's previous work is how upbeat it is. It retains the high energy, scatterbrain quality of Clarity's work, and it applies it to the cliches and the verbs of Britpop and J-pop. Its grand presentation is punctuated by this infectious forward momentum, with its danceable runway grooves and its themes of fighting for your right to exist. Early on, Rina ruminates on themes of identity, her struggle to live as her authentic self, and the lyrical insecurity is contrasted with how confidently she sings. We will discuss this at length later on in this video, but Rina is extremely open about her feelings in her music, to the point that many fans have developed something of a parasocial relationship with her. I'm not going to get bogged down in semantics because you already know what a parasocial relationship is. Most of the interactions from my observations with her fanbase are healthy. Rina wants to be open because she feels as if this will enhance her artistic presentation. She sacrifices mystique for the sake of transparency, and that's a fine trade-off, I think. It's also important to note that her success is not solely due to Clarence Clarity. Some of my favourite tracks of hers, Cherry, Comme des Garçons, were made without his production. Rina clearly has a good ear for songwriting, and that's why I consider these albums to be collaborations more so than solo albums. It's worth noting that each album cover says quite a lot about the style of each album. The EP cover is blurry and very close to her face, communicating a level of intimacy, and that shy quality is powerfully contrasted with how elegant yet stylishly bombastic the musical palettes are. It's just brilliant. You know, it's the kind of project that makes you wonder if any artist could ever top it. To me, talking about her debut album, Sawayama, is a very difficult task because I don't really know where to start. It's an album that's so good that a Robert Johnson-style pack must have been made to release it. Hang on. I just remembered I have like a sweater and I should wear it. Too hot for YouTube. Is this too much of her face? Is this too creepy? Who knows? I want to talk about everything, but I can't for the sake of decent pacing. I want to say up front that I'm a vaguely queer white man from Australia. I'm not going to be able to articulate the subtext and the feelings of being a British-Japanese queer woman. So I will leave certain points absent, not because I don't have opinions on them, but because those opinions deserve better than what I could articulate. As far as I'm concerned, Sawayama is the album to beat this decade. It has this holistic quality in which every single element elevates every other. Dynasty sets the emotional tone of the record. The opening strings sparkle like glitter, church bells and lone drum hits fill the mix, and the song suddenly shifts into a nu metal-esque romper. The lyrics set the scene of someone, presumably Rina, struggling with her concept of self. Her mental pain is described as hereditary, which is a metaphor for Rina coming from a divorced family. And the pressures of being Japanese in Britain, being separated from her birth father, and trying to live up to her mother's concept for her future led her down a lot of emotionally dark places.
Mother and father, I know you were raised differently, fighting about money and his infidelity. Now it's my time to make things right, and if I fail, then I am my dynasty.
At the end of the song, Rina vows to break the chain herself. The album, in very entertaining fashion, touches upon many different subjects that eventually loop back into this hyper idea of identity. XS is the biggest single on the album. It has these chunky guitar breakdowns, these addictive acoustic samples, and it is primarily a dance song. The acoustic samples have something of a Middle Eastern flavour to them, and their microtonality adds a unique quality to the song. Itself being an ode to hedonism and a condemnation of consumerism. On the surface, it's pretty straightforward. Materialism is a waste of money, and you can never satisfy a spending addiction. Wonderful! Comrade Rina! But I find the music video for the song to be a really interesting extension of this commentary. This video was released a day after the album, after all, and this paratext is part of the experience. A glittery liquid is being sold in a bottle, and the presentation is of an infomercial. The two main hosts look terribly artificial, with their fake tans, overdone makeup, and an unnatural plasticky style of movement. Rina herself gets on stage, and she moves like a robot. She starts glitching, her posture is overly rigid, and the shots that focus on her speed up and slow down unnaturally. This seems to be a representation of the oriental nature of cyberpunk tropes. This is a massive topic, and I've talked about Orientalism briefly in my video on anti-Semitism, so in short, Orientalism is both a field of study and a lens of social critique. Orientalism does not only focus on Asian cultures, but it fetishizes what the West would consider to be exotic, and it commodifies those traits for profit. Orientalism in regards to art can best be described as appropriative rather than appreciative. To explain the difference between these two, consider, if you will, the Wu-Tang Clan. They use imagery and samples from kung fu movies in their music, but the depths of the references reveal a deep appreciation and love for Chinese culture.
Without wisdom, there is no gain. And that hit me when I heard that, and it sent me to start researching Buddhism and finding kung fu books and things.
There's a desire to synthesize the artwork and create a unity between Black and Chinese cultures in America. It's badass because the artists regard the culture with an infectious reverence. Whereas the Beatles' discography is full of imagery taken from India. I don't have any Beatles albums because I'm not a fucking loser. There isn't a reverence for the culture, and they appropriate Indian signifiers to evoke a vague sense of spiritualism. It's exoticism, a differing microtonality that allows the Beatles to craft a quote-unquote unique sound for their Western audiences. The artwork is generalizing and it profits off of Orientalist stereotypes. Orientalism also intersects with gender in interesting ways. Edward Said's landmark book on the subject has a particularly entertaining couple of chapters concerning the bizarre ways in which Orientalists fetishize the women they're studying. These old Brits and Frenchmen were unreasonably horny, and not in the fun way, waxing and waning on the quote-unquote delight they found in the East's depravity. And these chapters have gone on to inspire loads of interesting papers building upon this intersection. A really useful tool for our purposes is how scholar Joey Lee describes the Asian femme dichotomy. Asian women are generally portrayed in media as either China dolls or dragon ladies. It's worth noting that Orientalists, by definition, don't study China, Japan, and Korea separately. All the women in these countries are just Asian women, or Chinese to the Orientalist. Hence, Lee's use of the word China invokes that racist stereotype as part of their critique. The China doll comes from Western soldiers' experiences with Asian sex workers during World War II and the Korean War.
The East Asian tragic butterfly character knows herself as the last priority of a white man's life, and is content with simply fulfilling his desires as long as he wants her. Her role, as she only exists as long as his desire for her exists, is servants and obedience, and when it is time for him to return to his superior white world, she must disappear without a trace as a last task to ease his guilt and purge his sin.
Asian women are thus hypersexualized and portrayed as overly submissive, incapable of looking out for themselves and in need of rescue by white men. Lee also describes the other half of this dichotomy.
The Dragon Lady's characteristics oppose that of the China doll. While the doll is selfless and serving, the dragon is selfish and brutal. Her sexuality comes from the exaggeration of her selfishness in combination with her connection to her other base desires. As she is self-serving and fiercely beautiful, she is sexually selfish and will engage in seduction to get what she wants at any cost. Despite the loss of her humanity, the Dragon Lady archetype is an improvement over the China doll due to her seemingly powerful independence and refusal to bow down.
In the music video for Excess, we see the host selling the product and mouthing the lines that are not actually in the song. Robot Rina, meanwhile, is only allowed to model the beverage and she mouths the words of the song, seen but not heard in universe. Sawayama herself has spoken about her experience of being a young model and being forced to dress up in geisha outfits for magazines.
One of the first few jobs that I did was for this tea company. Turn up and they literally have a full geisha outfit, like fake geisha. And literally the makeup artist, who was also Asian, was doing my makeup and saying, "I'm so sorry." They made me serve tea the whole night and it was absolutely mortifying.
Because these experiences were so humiliating for her, I think that this image is her channeling the China doll. In the music video, Robot Rina is not an active agent in the narrative. She's only allowed to be silent and smile. After watching this, I came across another great paper entitled Cyber Fantasies, Rina Sawayama, Asian Feminism, and Techno-Orientalism in the Age of Neoliberalism, which is an outrageously cool title. Written by Kuoch and Wang in 2018, this paper focuses primarily on the EP from 2017. It is really useful in interpreting what Rina's political and artistic motivations are. They pull from their own personal experience when they argue that Rina's use of cyberpunk tropes has her quote-unquote hacking Western narratives and channeling the kind of roles Asian women are allowed to occupy in society.
Sawayama's hacking of Techno-Orientalism is a process of unintelligibility that creates new modes of sociality that, in her performance, deconstructs Western norms imposed on Asian women. This emerges as people are unable to auditorily grasp and categorize her music.
It is way too hot for this. The kind of music she is playing features a wild mixture of cultures and genres. So in exposing Western audiences to different sounds and ideas, she displays new ways for Asian women to exist. Kuoch and Wang primarily focus on Rina's song Cyber Stockholm Syndrome in their analysis, saying that her adoption of the cyberpunk imagery is a kind of femme-Asian praxis, showing a way forward for Asian women who don't wish to conform to the China doll or the Dragon Lady. Separately, Joey Lee suggests an alternative that is strikingly similar to Rina's ethos.
The ongoing toxic portrayal of East Asian women in popular media as the China doll and Dragon Lady ultimately perpetuates othering and the dehumanization of East Asian women to ensure the dominance of the West. Rather than restricting the marginalized group to toxic binary stereotypes, Zing suggests that Asian characters can be emotional, political, and fallible. They could laugh, cry, and swear. They can be ordinary human beings.
Thus, Robot Rina can never be normal. She is a robot, incapable of plasticity. She was just made like that, nothing can be changed. And when we recognize that she is not an agent, we can recognize the injustice inherent in her programming and question what it represents for Asian women today. The Techno-Orientalism of the music video is further explored and critiqued when we hard cut from the first chorus to a sweatshop in which bottles are being produced. We are reminded that these luxurious products are often made by people under horrendous working conditions. Consider Beyonce making girl boss shirts derived from sweatshop labor. We see the staff sniffing the bottles and retching. The products aren't even as luxurious as they claim to be.
I've just started this calypso. It is fucking minging.
It is here that I think it's worth reconsidering the microtonality of the acoustic samples. Microtones are generally associated with Eastern music. It signifies the semitones in between the notes. For Western audience, these sound exotic, and I argue that they are used in this song to make us consider that many of the products that we buy in clothes stores are made in poorer countries which companies exploit. The golden liquid is exotic, but it's dull and smelly.
It is fucking minging. Suck your dad. It's minging, it's fucking minging.
As Robot Rina begins to break down, the video culminates in a scathing implication that the system is broken. This is further reinforced when we see a Gildan maiden with tubes attached to her breasts, evoking how we milk cows.
That was my idea because I wanted it to be the kind of embodiment of Earth and what we're extracting, the exploitation, and that was what I was trying to represent with the duality of those things, what's happening on the surface and the infomercials and the glamour.
And because this maiden is played by Rina herself, we can read this in two different ways. Firstly, according to Kuoch and Wang,
Sawayama becomes cyborgian through the digitization of her body and surroundings. She becomes one with technology the same way Asiatic bodies are digitized in the 21st century. Her choice to physically embody technology is thus an instance of over-identification, used to disrupt the Occidental, or Western gaze, and subvert Techno-Orientalist norms.
That is interesting. We will return to the so-called digitization of her body in a later chapter. But what this reading communicates to us is that she is attempting to take command of the stereotypes of the China doll and the Dragon Lady by using these tropes to demonstrate how Asian women have influenced culture with their fashion and their aesthetics, packaging these things for profit. The second reading is that Rina is serving up her own problems for products, or more bluntly, she's milking her trauma. The commodification of her pain is a topic that we will focus on much later in this video, but the fact that the maiden and the robot both look the same suggests that they are one and the same, that the robot is a copy of the maiden, and both parts of the same whole that are being turned into different types of products. I think both of these readings are equally plausible, and they can coexist, or maybe Rina herself thought it would just be cool to be this hot, scary monster maiden lady. Maybe the curtains are just blue, I don't know. Probably not. We close out as we see Robot Rina in a dumpster, and as the final note of the song passes, we see her die. It's a bleak finale, but it shows how fragile her position in the music industry is. Hypothetically, she could lose her voice, and she would no longer be profitable, and thus she would be chucked away like a used tissue. Rina puts a lot of effort into her music videos, and they are rewarding to examine for that very reason.
And I have music videos, and I've always loved acting, so I've acted in my music videos, and I co-direct my music videos.
The nature of Orientalism is not constrained specifically to this song. In fact, I argue that all of this academia and all of this emotional turmoil can be communicated on just the album cover by itself. Rina poses as a futuristic being, in such a way that she is the way forward for Asian women, with themselves at the center of their own world instead of white men. It is explored throughout her entire discography, most notably on Tokyo Love Hotel, in which she waxes and wanes on her personal angst of tourists in Japan treating the country like a cheap one-night stand. There is something to be said about the commodification of Japanese culture, and to an extent the West's current commodification of Korean culture. I'm not super qualified to do that right here, but these motifs, Orientalism, the commodification of suffering, and the intrinsic brokenness of the self under neoliberalism will be explored many more times on the Sawayama album. Chapter 3, Snakeskin Handbags. As much as I love Shut the Fuck Up and Comme des Garçons, in which she uses Techno-Orientalism to encourage women to express anger and allow them to demonstrate confidence and masculinity in their femininity, I can't linger on them for the sake of decent pacing. Besides, I'm more interested in discussing the next narrative track on this record. Akasaka Sad is one of the oddest and most experimentally produced tracks Rina or Clarity has ever cooked up. Futuristic doesn't quite begin to describe it. Cyberpunk might though. It effortlessly attaches Britpop tendencies with J-pop and K-pop intonations. The song structure, when you strip away all the special effects, is relatively traditional. Verse, chorus, verse, conclusion. And that can be said with every other song on the album, and this should not be taken as a criticism. Experimental does not inherently denote incoherency in regards to structure. It is often elevated by conforming to traditional structures, because it helps an audience take in the strange elements of production. For example, my resident Rina stan Don Bongo, that's what she asked me to call her in her videos, says that the chorus is evocative of Justin Timberlake's Cry Me a River. These callbacks further reinforce the themes of nostalgia while creating an auditory tapestry.
There's like that melody's like super, that's nice. Almost like Destiny's Child.
Who are my forever iconic pop girls? Britney, forever, and now she's free. Now she's free and she's married, and that picture with all of them, with Madonna, Paris, it just was amazing. Selena Gomez, I feel like she was there as well.
I also believe that this is further used to strengthen the lyrical themes of the song. Rina is nostalgic for the Timberlake track, and it reminds her of her inner child. A child who struggles to square her Japanese legacy with the life that she leads back in the UK. She talks about how she was once embarrassed about her last name, and that makes the title of the record an affirmation of her identity. This song is one of many, in which Rina remembers a trip that she took to Japan in her youth, to see her father of whom she'd been disconnected from.
So I would go back every holiday, I think summer, and we tried to go back in the winter as well, because all my family, including my dad, were in Japan. Yeah, I saw them, I guess, twice or 3 times a year.
This is represented by a spoken Japanese verse that she sings in the middle of the song. She explains,
I'm not really that good at writing Japanese lyrics. I can barely write conversational Japanese, but this section needed it, and so I tried, lol. It roughly translates to, from country to country I hear tragic symphonies, every day searching for a pain that turns into happiness. Doesn't sound as good in English.
Her self-deprecation is pretty funny here, but it comes across to me as humble and human. Her isolation from her birth country and her father sent her down a dark path, and the chaotic nature of the production of Akasaka Sad conveys to the audience the internal struggles of a younger, less self-sure version of Rina. We continue to explore the mindset of a younger Rina on the next song, Paradisen. The song starts with extra reverb, and the audio of the chorus being particularly echoey. It seems to be evocative of a karaoke bar and a more carefree, less depressing headspace. So the song starts with its retro percussion claps and arcade-inspired synths. It sounds like a game of Dance Dance Revolution. There is some light compression on this song, in which the vocals feel constrained. Vocal compression is a tool, and its use here is more than aesthetic. Rina herself feels squashed by her mother, and she wants to misbehave. So this, along with her spoken rather than sung vocal delivery on the verses, conveys this idea beautifully. You know, it works with the digital nature of the song. If this was, say, an acoustic ballad, it would feel a bit out of place. Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which this song is about wanting to be carefree, but being beholden to a parent. It takes quite a dark turn when she describes her first kiss and the much older man it was with. This turn is honestly quite disquieting, and it really annoyed me when people listened to it and they thought the song was just about someone hacking her computer.
Having these weird experiences like being hacked at one point in her life.
Sawayama my ass.
Rina Sawayama. Rina Sawayama.
Then he messaged me being like, have I been saying it wrong? And I'm like, it's fine. You know what? You tried.
I'm gonna put a pin in this topic and talk about it when we come to Hold the Girl. But as an adult, Rina meditates upon her relationship with her mother and how she tried her best to look after her during these rough times. It shows Rina's personal growth and her love for her mum. This youthful quality of the album is what makes it able to pinball between so many different subjects in succession.
For me, it really mattered that the album flowed from beginning to end. No too weird detour. I really do believe in journeys with the record. If it takes it somewhere else, then it needs to come back to the main line.
We hear about tough life lessons and gender expectations on Love Me For Me. We learn about Rina's youth and her regrets on the ballad Bad Friend, and we listen to Rina wrestle with climate grief and nihilism on Fuck This World. Chosen Family transcended the album itself, and it resonated with many people who were alienated from their biological families due to their identities, and Rina softly affirms the value of found family. This song is a tearjerker and a gorgeous moment on the record. Sawayama ends the album flawlessly with the track Snakeskin, which feels like a ribbon bow atop a perfectly wrapped gift. With soaring choruses contrasted against propulsive instrumentation, the song slithers along with Rina's emotions, twisting whenever she turns her head. It feels alive and in the moment, which is quite an achievement considering how synthetic the textures are. The compression on her voice even comes and goes as she gains and loses confidence. The lyrics are chaotic and emblematic of animal movements. You know, she rips and tears apart her skin, and then she sings about selling it to the audience to wear. This is the final destination of the Golden Maiden from XS.
Buy my expensive exclusive pain. Wear my fine couture is your branded repayment. I tear my soul into two so that you can pretend despair.
This sentiment is at the very core of the album. The transaction she makes with her audience makes her money, and it then makes her audience feel closer to her. All of the behaviour that we've seen Rina express throughout the record, the commodification of her soul and of her trauma, isn't just bad for her, it's bad for her audience. Because becoming too familiar with her deepest fears and wallowing in her deepest regrets only maintains that despair. It doesn't disperse it. To cleanse yourself of trauma and regret, you have to tackle it head on, work on it, and leave it in the past. And to commodify one's suffering only means that an artist becomes known for their suffering. The emotional immaturity of Rina's younger self, made manifest on songs like Paradisin and Bad Friend, were complemented by the nostalgic sound palette. A track like Shut the Fuck Up is so much fun to listen to, but it strengthens the image of personal immaturity. This, along with her reverence for the work of Britney Spears and of boy bands like NSYNC, are emblematic of a willingness to stay in the past. Of course, Rina is also working within the realm of hyperpop, and she's not the only one using these ideas to make great music. I mean, in 2020 alone, Poppy made an amazing nu metal album. But what made Sawayama such an electrifying experience for me personally is that it used the motifs of hyperpop to explore trauma and racism in an incredibly smart way. Nostalgia for the past inhibits your ability to grow, and for Rina to be a healthier woman, she must move on. Reveling in irony can only get you so far, and discarding irony in the favour of sincerity is the first step to becoming a better person. Hyperpop is sonically experimental, but it only remixes old tracks, breaking them down and turning them into something new. And don't get me wrong, I love it all. But it rarely transcends entertainment. This album is so special because of the bold artistic choices of Rina, the unparalleled production chops of Clarence Clarity, and the ungodly songwriting talent of their team. I call it a Madvillain moment because these two artists together pushed each other to be better. It transcends, and that's why it's my favourite pop album of all time.
Yeah.
Chapter 4, The Collab and the Concert. Sawayama got excellent reviews. It was considered to be a daring, triumphant, and whip-smart debut album, critically acclaimed and beloved by many of those who listened to it. I do remember it getting squashed a bit by Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters, getting a rare 10 out of 10 from Pitchfork, but in music communities, this was quite well liked. I felt as if my love for the album was stronger than many of my peers, though. It might be because it was a specific intersection of many different genres that resonated with me, but I continued to watch on as Sawayama won awards and made new songs. I don't want to spend a long time dwelling in the in-between period between albums, though. It needs to be remarked that Rina changed the eligibility requirements for the Brit Awards.
I was like gonna leave it, right? I was like, well, this sucks. I don't know what to do. Until the nominations came out and there were articles from like the BBC, The Guardian, who were like the snub list, and I was on them. And so I thought, you know what, this might be kind of like an interesting story to tell, like why I wasn't nominated, and maybe people aren't aware of it.
She was not allowed to be nominated for Sawayama because she was born in Japan, even though she spent most of her goddamn life in England.
Basically, when that interview went out, it went viral. Hashtag Sawayama is British went viral worldwide. And long story short, head of BPI, which is the governing body over like the Brits and the Mercurys, contacted. We had a really great conversation. He was like, you know what, we're going to change the rules. And we yeah, so they changed the rules, and I am now from next year eligible for the Mercurys, and I actually got nominated for Rising Star Award for the Brits that year.
She managed to change these laws, and if that isn't fucking praxis, then what else is?
You've changed this for people that are walking behind you. You've made us realize that it's not okay to not be inclusive. And the thing is, you didn't say you just moved there last year. I now live in Brixton, nominate me.
Yeah.
You are as British as any of those other artists being nominated, but maybe you weren't born in a British hospital.
Yeah.
Come on, listen to her accent.
An album like Sawayama is always going to be hard to follow up, and I do not envy Rina for having to try.
It is true what they say, like first album you have your whole life to write it, and then your second album you have like a year tops to write it. So you're just kind of like, you know, trying to get everything together.
But she subsequently decided to lean more into sincerity and further away from irony. And the shift is foundational to understand the difference between these two albums. Because irony means that you like something in spite of your knowledge of it being bad. Post-irony is self-awareness of that tendency and then loving it anyway. Acting so sincerely that you can't tell the difference between the naive fan and the post-ironic one. But during the period between albums, Rina seemed to have grown tired of pulling from irony from art. It's well documented that she went for quite a lot of therapy, and she's also quite open about how it influenced her lyrics.
And during lockdown was a time of self-reflection. And even though it was a very painful process to go through, I was helped by some therapy and friends that I was able to talk with. I felt that it was a really important process to go through, and it was actually very much a privilege to be able to go through that process and come out with a album.
But the first time that I experienced this album, it washed off me like a duck's back. Nothing affected me, offended me, or did so much as make me groove. I felt supremely underwhelmed. You know, the oddball songwriting and the sound palette of Sawayama were gone in favour of a country-tinged house record. Intellectually, I knew that I wanted this, but aesthetically, it left me a touch cynical. I saw a similar trajectory between Rina Sawayama and her colleague Charli XCX. Full disclosure, I'm not as much of a fan as Charli as I am Rina, but I do appreciate her two albums, Charli and How I'm Feeling Now. It's very glitchy. I wonder if YouTube's gonna booba. They were experimental, hyperpop influenced, and genuinely quite bizarre pieces of art from a very mainstream artist. Charli and Rina even made a song together on Charli's 2022 album, Crash.
Don't make me tap the sign.
And I would, urge anyone listening just to be conscious, because that's what the lingo that we were brought up with is that it has to be one or the other. There has to be one main pop girl, one main rap girl. It was just it was crazy that how we're conditioned to think about women.
I admit that I was pretty keen for the release of this album, primarily because I thought the marketing was very funny. Although, I found it to be quite forgettable. Good Ones was one of the best pop tracks of 2022, but the songwriting on the rest of the album was pretty blah. The production was nowhere near as exciting or as bizarre as her previous outings, and it left very little impact on me. I'm not planning on doing a full autopsy on this record, but I saw many parallels between how it and Hold the Girl came out. Both albums were sonically diluted and commercially safe follow-ups to stranger records. Although my first impression of the album was a touch cynical, my mind changed quite significantly at the beginning of this year. As I began to conceptualize this video, I was lucky enough to see Rina in January during the Melbourne leg of her worldwide tour. I went with a group of friends, and it was a very fun time. I was especially excited because this was her first Australian tour since the pandemic. The venue was quite small and intimate, holding maybe 2,000 people. The crowd was high energy and caked in makeup. The DJ at one point played Since You've Been Gone by Kelly Clarkson, and the crowd went harder for that than they did some of the actual songs that Rina played. Likewise, after the show, Shania Twain's Man I Feel Like a Woman started playing, and the crowd went fucking bonkers. The energy was a lot of fun to take in, but I do admit that it also dampened my enjoyment when many of the people around me were just having conversations in my ear while Rina was actually playing. Dude, I'm queer, but the repeated catchphrases of "Yes, mummy, slay" really started to annoy me.
Hey guys, so I just want to announce that I am officially banning the word mother.
So many people were on their phones filming that I began to wonder if they were actually there to listen. Someone next to us was texting for about half the show, and the concert itself was pretty good. The opening act went on for about half an hour longer than everyone wanted. She played some hyperpop influenced house for so long that the crowd's energy noticeably dissipated. Hence why I think they went nuts over Kelly Clarkson. Some random TikToker or YouTuber got on stage to introduce Rina, and they rambled on and on for ages, throwing merch at random members of the audience after asking entry-level quiz questions, and once Rina herself got on stage with a guitarist, a drummer, and 2 backup dancers, it ended up being a pretty good show. I bumped it. I commend her for performing it live with a few musicians, because it made the song sound better and the show feel more alive. My interest in the music died out by the end because the crowd was very annoying, and I moved to the back of the room because I got a headache. I found that many of my friends felt many of the same feelings that I did. On the one hand, I can imagine the vibe of the Sydney show being different to a Melbourne one, since Melbourne went through a massive lockdown during COVID, so they probably had a lot of suppressed energy that urged them to be louder and more obnoxious. But on the other hand, I saw Idols live in Melbourne back on Halloween 2022, and the crowd wasn't anywhere near as obnoxious or rude. And that was a punk show! The biggest plus that I got from the experience was, of course, Rina herself. After Hold the Girl came out, I found it to be so disappointing that I just didn't listen to it for months after.
And now that she's had this taste of pop stardom, it seems that she is leaning into that as hard as she possibly can with this new LP.
Listening to Rina speak about her thoughts on the album impacted my sense of cynicism, and I do think that she's coming from a much more genuine and wholesome place than I initially gave her credit for. This is further reinforced by all of the podcasts and the interviews she's done since. I initially thought that the parallel with Charlie was just cynical, and I don't mean to say that it would be wrong for Rina for trying to make money. Music's a business, and based on Rina's lyrics, she grew up poor and her mother struggled to make ends meet. She worked for 3 years to save up money for her EP. I'm not against Rina making money or going commercial, because you don't have to live in poverty to be artistically authentic. The adage, one for them, one for me, does come to mind, but under neoliberalism, one can't fret too much about their oeuvre. In my opinion, what makes Hold the Girl such a frustrating experience is that it's not a compromise. It's a lot more emotionally mature than Sawayama, which is what I wanted, but the songwriting is so bland, and the lyrics ultimately go against the message of Snakeskin. It's artistically rich, but it kneecaps itself with some lackluster sonic choices. Chapter 5, Holding the Girl. I want to start off this chapter with a critique about pacing, and to do that I have to ruin my own pacing by going on 2 tangents, so indulge me for a moment. My favourite kind of opening to an album is a short instrumental followed by an aggressive opener. Consider Lightning Bolt's Wonderful Rainbow. So we start with the track Hello Morning, which feels like a snoozy and laid-back instrumental with a noisy, glitchy aesthetic. It feels like waiting for the lights to go down in a theater, and then it suddenly gives way to Assassins. There's this sudden blast of noisy guitar going faster than bullets. The intro builds anticipation, and it makes the following song sound better because it was built up to. It's a trick that Sawayama uses to great effect on Dynasty, which sounds as good as it does because it has a minute of build-up beforehand. I went on this brief tangent to illustrate what I think the first flaw of this record is, and it isn't the song Minor Feelings, which laid within its title it's already filled with so much artistic consideration. I can't imagine it's a coincidence that it shares a name with an essay book by a Korean-American poet, Cathy Park Hong. Minor feelings, according to this book, are a phenomenon that people of colour feel in America. Feelings like envy and irritations. Feelings which fester inside of people because they're unable to be aggressive to white people because they could lose their jobs. Or they could get punished by bigots. They denote the experience of being punished like an adult when you're a kid, and being condescended to as an adult. I feel like much of this can be applied to a young British woman who was once ashamed of her last name because it was noticeably Japanese.
Minor feelings are the racialized range of emotions that are negative, dysphoric, and therefore untelegenic, built by the sediments of everyday racial experience and the irritant of having one's perception of reality constantly questioned or dismissed. Minor feelings arise, for instance, upon hearing a slight, knowing it's racial and being told, "Oh, that's all in your head."
And to have Rina start off her album singing,
"All my life I've felt out of place. All my life I've been saving face. For all these minor feelings are majorly breaking me down."
we have a brilliant start to the record, and it sounds so grand, with its symphonic instrumentation and its moody, ominous synths. It centers Rina as the subject, and it creates a true sense of gravitas towards these minor feelings. It is the perfect place to start, so perfect that she now uses it to open her shows. So like with Lightning Bolt, opening the album with a moody piece that builds tension makes the next song sound even better. This seems like the perfect place to swing into an XS type moment. And then we fall to a silence. Beat, beat, beat. It's a bit anticlimactic, don't you think? All of that tension and anticipation has just evaporated. Gone. Nada. It's so confounding. When I first heard the record, I checked to see if I had accidentally turned on shuffle. I don't even want to critique the sequencing on this album all that much, but the choice to place these two songs at the very beginning feels ill-chosen. Like, separately they're both very good, but it's just the one after the other doesn't quite work for me. The title track itself is actually a great microcosm for many of the strengths and the weaknesses on the record, funnily enough. I think the song is relatively straightforward, and I need to stress that's fine. I don't think that every song has to be about Techno-Orientalism or Fem-Asian praxis. High concept does not equal good here, and the music and the songwriting on the previous efforts only elevated the politics. Like, this song could just be about doing drugs and eating pussy, and I'd say good for her! But my problem, along with this sequence, is that the beat is weak. Let's go on that second tangent. Rina has stated multiple times in interviews that the genre of a song only comes to her after she has written it.
To me, when I write a song, like, the lyrics and the melody, that's what chooses the genre. Like, I'm not going in there doing, oh, I'm gonna like do so many different genres because I'm so fucking cool. It's like, I'm like, who is this trying to speak to? STFU. It has to be a metal song. It's saying STFU. It's just kind of like messing with it a bit and having a bit of fun.
If it feels like an angsty nu metal song, then it's time to iron your Jinko jeans and start rolling. Alright. I would do a 5-hour-long video about Limp Bizkit if you people give me money. This time around, she was feeling more sentimental and soft, so she chose to write the album to be more low-key, less nostalgic, and more honest about her feelings. She had complete creative control over everything, and that is a beautiful thing. I simply have issues with the content, not the motive. And further, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert or even a songwriter myself. I refer to myself as an articulate listener of music. But I want to communicate something to get my point across. Consider for a moment, My Bloody Valentine's Only Shallow. Is this the round the right way? No. both sides look almost the same. Oh god! If we strip away all of the effects, the chord progression here is pretty generic. The song still sounds pleasant, no hate on this guy, but it doesn't hit anywhere near as hard as this. The layers of noisy haze and the mixing are what give the track its personality. And it better have, because this album was so expensive that it sunk its label. So when I say that I find the songwriting on Hold the Girl to be lackluster, it is not exclusively because I think it's poorly written. I think Sawayama and Hold the Girl both have a similar level of songwriting quality. You know, the choruses are catchy for the most part, the instrumentals build appropriately, and the percussion makes you want to dance. But like with Only Shallow, the eccentricities of the production trick you into thinking you are listening to something more complicated than it actually is. Unfortunately, this album is less exciting to listen to because of its production. I like some of the details in the mix here. There are sampled fragments of Rina's voice, implying an element of emotional chaos to the song. The acoustic guitars sound crisp and rich. The synth keys are very Y2K core. They sound pretty enough separately, and the percussion gives the track a forward momentum. I do find it pleasant, but all of these individual elements feel so tied together. There's something about the main chord progression here that bothers me, and I can't explain note by note what I think is wrong, but I can't pick this song out of a lineup. It's numbingly generic. The only thing that differentiates it from dozens and dozens of house acts is the timbre of the keys. They have this ethereal quality, like a Lux piano from another dimension, and the vocal samples swirling around them gives the impression of a much more complex progression than it actually is. But because these vocals swirl, I can't help but focus on the monotonous progression in the fashion show percussion. Allow me to try and visualize this. I picture in my head the image of a planet with multiple moons surrounding it. The song wants you to focus on the moons as they hover around you, but I can't help but focus on the planet as it moves around. Like, it has a nice forward momentum, but it isn't exactly very exciting. All of these elements don't quite cohere into something that makes sense to my brain. Instead of sounding like futuristic glossy pop, it sounds like a lame doof-doof concert that your high school bullies would go to, and the percussion ultimately feels derivative of the artist she's inspired by. Let's be charitable and look at the music video as well, because it is one of the most well-composed things she's ever made. A house sits lonesome in the middle of a prairie. Rina finds herself closer to the sky than she is to other people, and we see her jump off of a roof. The vocal samples in the mix act almost diegetically here, as if she's screaming 1,000 times over. The internal chaos is directly related to the lyrics.
Sometimes I get down with guilt for the promises I've broken to my younger self.
The inside of the house is dark, and there are points in which we can barely see her. The costume design is of an old Western maiden, and this further alienates her from her own time period. And when she leaves the house, she's dragged right back in by a seemingly supernatural force. This image repeats half a dozen times. This gives us a metaphor of someone being trapped in a relationship that is not good for them. You could even argue that, with the Western outfit, this is supposed to emulate how queer kids feel in rural places. The dress is conservative attire with its corsets and appendages, and thus she is being oppressed. The outside forces do not acknowledge her unless she tries to escape, thus she is unable to escape being the person that she doesn't want to be.
Sometimes I just want to run away. Leave behind that old me, start again. Then I'll remember who I'm really made of.
She wakes up in a time loop, day after day. Rina faces the same torment and she continues to try and run away, to the point that the house itself starts shaking, the reality of heteronormativity itself falling apart at the seams. Her life is dead inside, so she tries to convene with her younger self.
Teach me the words I used to know. Yeah, I forgot 'em long ago. I want to remember. She is me, and I am her.
The song is about a long-forgotten passion. You have dreams in your life as you grow up, and as the realities of neoliberalism starts to set in, you have to forget them just to survive. This, combined with the shame a queer person feels around their parents, leads a lot of people to go in search of their younger self, their innocent passion. This itself is represented by the house splitting apart at the seams. We see Rina singing into a hole in the floor, and she seems to see a younger version of herself. Rina has been open about her excessive use of alcohol in her early teens, her yearning for fun and her want to break free from the pressures of adult life. And she looks down at this younger version of herself, on the floor with strange people surrounding her. What this video is communicating here is quite sophisticated, and I think it's a metaphor for mindfulness, becoming more aware of your bodily sensations and acknowledging them. An author on a great book about trauma and mindfulness is Bessel van der Kolk, and he writes on the subject,
"Traumatized people often have trouble sensing what is going on in their bodies. They lack a nuanced response to frustration. They either react to stress by becoming spaced out or with excessive anger."
Rina's frustration is represented by her attempts to leave the house and always waking up at the beginning of a time loop. It's only by becoming closer with her younger version of herself that she's able to break the cycle.
They'll tell you to sit up and shut up and grow up. What the hell do they know? 'Cause the girl in your soul is singing on, and you owe her the world.
This is a plea to fans to forgive themselves for their own guilt and for feeling helpless in bad situations. Rina urges you, the listener, to hold on to your inner child, to cradle and nurture them, especially if you were never given that affection when you were them, because you deserve to give yourself compassion. And this isn't the only reading. I found a really heartfelt video by a small YouTuber where they describe how it connected with her as a trans woman, holding the girl she always knew that she was. It's really good advice, honestly. It is wise, it is gorgeous, and yet the music is mind-numbingly generic house. But lest we forget, Comme des Garçons is one of my favourite Rina tracks. I'm not opposed to Dylan going electric over here. My problem is that the sound palette adds very little to the message of this song, and the structure doesn't help you reach any kind of emotional catharsis. The art is morally compelling but artistically dubious, and that's kind of how I would describe the whole album. You know, I can set aside my subjective dislike of the song. Like, it's fine, I don't have to like it because I can see artistic merit in it. And good for Rina for coming out with a cohesive piece of music, something of which I can barely do. Hell, I can barely even make a camera work. This is my second time filming this. But this plays into my own hypothesis for this video, that many fans enjoy the album in spite of the music. They only return to a handful of songs because the tunes and the songwriting just aren't captivating. But what's interesting is the lyrics themselves, because they're so sincere and wise. Thoughtful lyrics, uninspired beats. I want to like it, but I can't listen to it. It's a strange paradox. And that paradox is honestly more interesting than the album itself. Chapter 6, The Paradoxes. I can't believe I forgot. So for Christmas this year, Don Bongo gave me this, and then my friend Angelica gave me this. I'm gonna place that right in the middle. Don't talk to me or my daughter ever again. How did I forget that? When I first heard the album, I noticed that the songwriting wasn't really doing anything for me, and my first impulse was to check the writing credits on the album. Maybe the answer to all of this is simply that there's a new team at the helm. Maybe the mad villain factor has faded away. But when you do inspect the credits of the record, Clarity and Rina are still executive producers. On Sawayama, Clarity wrote 6 songs and produced 9 of 13. And on Hold the Girl, he wrote 5 songs and produced 8 of 13. It's still around the same amount, and based on what I've read, there were no major arguments or disagreements on the production end. Clarity is still a major part of the sonic identity of this album, and as I will get into later in this video, this will end up being a major problem. I believe that an artist should always try to evolve their sound, and as I said earlier, hyperpop is beginning to become a bit cliché and overdone. I'm totally fine with Rina changing her sound. That is not the problem here. It is simply that the songwriting is really unmemorable. Many of the songs sound as if they roll into one another. They become difficult to tell apart, whereas each song on Sawayama felt distinct. The only song that I regularly return to on this record is This Hell, a tongue-in-cheek piece of Shania Twain worship, and I will admit, it has really grown on me over time. Tracks like Chosen Family and Cherry deeply resonated with a lot of queer people, so of course you'd want to lean into that. This is a declaration that nihilism is better with someone that you love. If heaven consists of bigots and transphobes, then burning in hellfire with your gender-fuck queer friends sounds wonderful. But there is something that kind of annoys me about this track, just a little bit. This is the only song on the album where the team sound like they're having fun making it. Shut the Fuck Up is knowingly silly, and it makes you giggle when you listen to it. It has an X factor, the ability to make an audience sit up in their seat and pay attention.
You say these things, right away somebody picks them up. But also, the fact that it has this metal, I think it's even hard for a lot of people to get past the idea of a woman singing that kind of music. You walk in and people think you are going to sound a certain way. Yeah. You already are tagged with the modeling thing. And now you're like, shut the fuck up. And you're singing it to hard metal, right, Jeff?
And that X factor is missing on this record, because the rest of the track list sounds terribly dour. And while that dourness has a lyrical purpose, it doesn't exactly make for a fun experience. Now, some of my favourite records aren't fun experiences in the traditional sense. I think of Sinner Get Ready, A Crow Looked at Me, or The Sunset Tree. Popular records don't have to be fun to be good in my eyes, because passion is what makes an album great, and art is not about pure hedonism. I just happen to like a message that makes me groove. So when writing this video, I wanted to return to this album and appreciate it as a more low-key outing, you know? Try to be as charitable as possible, because you have your entire life to write your first album, and then only a year or so to make your second. Further, because I understood the place that Rina was coming from, you know, this passionate plea to her fans to live their best lives and to heal their traumas, I really, sincerely wanted to love it. But with that plea comes a more streamlined and watered-down singer-songwriter approach to the whole affair. The musical palette insists upon dumb fun, while the lyrics and the songwriting aim for something more thoughtful. That label singer-songwriter actually helps us articulate some of the dissonance at play here. The album has the intimate quality of an acoustic singer-songwriter project, but the sonic palette of a cheap house record. You want to lean in to savor the performance, but you're repelled by the tone of the music. I think what really gets my goat about this record is that the previous one ended with an admission that this type of lyricism that she'd been writing was bad for her mental health. You know, harvesting her trauma and selling it as a snakeskin handbag for her fans to flaunt. And because she had to perform those songs, she re-experienced the traumas that they hinted at, and thus she had to go to therapy. A lot of therapy, in which she had several healthy breakthroughs. And then, in this moment of clarity, she decided to dedicate her next album to shifting units of snakeskin. There's a clip that I wanted to show here where an interviewer asks Rina whether or not she would rather have critical acclaim or sales.
You can't ask that question. 2 years ago, I think it would have been critical acclaim, but now it's less commercial success. It's more like, can I write a big song?
And if I were a different type of YouTube critic guy who didn't care, I could just say, aha! Smoking gun! I win! Bye-bye. Which is a very stupid and reductive way to look at it, because I believe that this isn't cynical. It's badass, actually.
So I'm like, as a songwriter, I want to challenge myself and think, can I do it? Can I write a pop song that connects to people but has meaning? And so that challenge like really excites me.
Like, it's an affirmation of her worth as an artist, and it shows her aiming for new goals. She isn't making the same album twice, and that's great. It's what I want. Further, shifting to that position of giving a side of earnest therapeutic advice after serving nothing but fun of snakeskin is not a bad idea to follow up Sawayama. But there's one major flaw in Sawayama's approach that bothers me. There's a fallacy that many white male writers fall into when they try to explore the experiences of marginalized women, and that is that they need a reason to believe that their pain is real. And I, categorically, do not want to do that here. I hope that I have established that I love how Rina subverts Orientalism, and I adore her special form of femme-Asian praxis. You know, destroy gender, smash white supremacist patriarchy. Fuck yeah. So, keep all of that in mind when I say this, because after studying these lyrics and coming up with so many different interpretations of her work, I don't have a grasp on what's wrong with her, which is a problem, because this album is solely dedicated to her coming to terms with her mental health, and I feel mean in saying this, but to me, this adds a terrible dissonance of tonal inconsistency. For the sake of nuance, let's compare this with my video on lingua ignota. The issues at the core of that artist's piece of work were emotional abuse and sexual violence. It was clear what Christian Hader was critiquing there, and in laying bare those problems, it made her critiques of misogyny and Christianity more powerful. Sawayama, in contrast, is kind of vague with her problems, and because of that, it becomes difficult to intuit what she's singing about exactly. And certainly, she sings broadly about childhood trauma, minor feelings, repressing one's sexuality, and wanting to escape. But there's no critique on these matters. It's gesture rather than explanation. And let's take this a step further, because I don't need a diagnosis to understand mental problems. You know, Lingua Ignota never says, "Gee whiz, I sure have lots of PTSD, wink, wink, nudge." Like, I'm mentally ill. I crave innuendo, implication, poetic license, art. And what's frustrating about all of this is that it was pulled off pretty well on Sawayama. This album is about disaffected youth and how nostalgia brings back bad times. You get so many different topics: masculinity, anger, Asian racism, climate grief, and all of these elements form an emotional tapestry that's more emotionally potent than just explaining a clinical diagnosis. This album touches on so many different topics that it gains a holistic impression of the malaise young people feel under neoliberalism. Further, she often writes about her childhood, and she has enough distance from it to discuss how emotionally immature she was. It makes the whole thing introspective and intimate, all the while the musical palettes are irregular and insane. It is very memorable. On the new album, Rina is fresh out of therapy, and I think that she hasn't had enough time to process her feelings because she doesn't have enough distance to critique said trauma, and also going too deep into the weeds would likely bum her audience out on her house record. The frustrating part about all of this is that Hold the Girl still shares so much of this introspective DNA. Like, I find the lyrical themes on the title track, This Hell, Frankenstein, and Send My Love to John to be genuinely moving and profound. But those moments are rare. And the track list feels padded with extraneous songs that are ultimately forgettable. It lacks that holistic quality or that profound resonance. Allow me to be clear and, have a look at the subtext to all of this, because Rina Sawayama does not owe any of us details about her childhood in the first place. She doesn't have to speak about violence for her work to have meaning. The ambiguity here is entirely intentional. It's sort of like she's setting a boundary with her audience. She's not going to talk about certain issues because it pains her. That is healthy. Compare this, where are you? Compare it with Lingua Ignota, who recently retired her project because the subject matter was harming her mental health. I get it. I completely get it. It's not sustainable or healthy to make art out of intense trauma. But she's still doing that here. She's printing out snakeskin handbags, but now she's crying while doing it. And that feels ghoulish to me. But my own subjective feelings aside, I think that the bland musical palette harms other songs as well. The next song on the album, Catch Me in the Air, diminishes the emotional significance of Hold the Girl for me. Because you could swap out this song with that and the music video there wouldn't change very much. We have similar motifs of empty skies, addressing your inner child, running away, borderline suicidality. This song feels slightly more triumphant than the previous one, but if I hadn't have studied them separately, I couldn't tell them apart. Another problem with this album first rears its head here. The vocal compression on Sawayama's voice makes the mix sound weird. I'm going to use this as a reference clip. Now, Rina has said in many interviews that she likes the sound of digital compression because she thinks it sounds better.
I like the punchy compressed sound. Compression, sort of like making quiet things sound louder and then louder things sound quieter, so then everything sort of exists in this same thickness of sound.
And it's her album, she can do as she pleases. But I think in this case, the song doesn't benefit from this choice. Even if I think it's very similar to Hold the Girl, it's supposed to feel open and crisp. Rina swims in an ocean of synthesizers, and then she backstrokes away lest demons bite her toes. but the vocal compression on her voice doesn't add to this feeling of isolation or being trapped. Instead, it sounds distracting, and I can't help but feel as if it clashes with the other aesthetics of the song. I feel much the same way about Forgiveness, even though I do acknowledge it's a bit more like classic Rina, with its stranger and more psychedelic passages. If only I had a bit more energy behind it. Ditto Holy Till You Let Me Go. As I said, these songs all kind of melt into one another for me. They share similar aesthetics and vocal messages. And even a house track about Catholic guilt and queer dread can't grab my attention underneath the overwhelming weight of boredom it envelops me in. Oh, Jesus. I'm not going to bed. I'm a big boy. I make video essays for YouTube that no one watches. Chapter 7. Nu Metal and Nostalgia. Alright, the gays and the theys. This next chapter is going to be a little bit upsetting, so I'm going to provide a timecode here to skip to a part where it's less upsetting. The first song that really grabs my attention on the record again is the nu metal tinged Your Age. Not for the sound palettes, of which I find sonically difficult to pass due to the overblown production, but rather for personal reasons. When I was in year 11, I was really good friends with a girl named T. I've changed everyone's name in this next coming part. I'm not going to dox people. T had a pedophile boyfriend. There's no way to gently say that. They first started speaking when she was 14, and in 2015 she was 17 and he was 25. He lived in Alberta, Canada, and for her 18th birthday, he flew across the world to spend it with her. When you are 17, you don't see that much of a difference between yourself and adults. I felt a little bit apprehensive at the time, but I wanted to be a good friend to T, so I accompanied her to the airport to meet him. It all feels like such a fever dream now. I remember his voice, his facial gestures. Even I also remember the ways he tried to manipulate me. Like, he said to me that I was one of the nicest people he'd ever met. And I call bullshit on that because I was a terrible person in college. And of course, a creature like this was abusive as hell to her. And some years later, I managed to help her break up with him. I haven't spoken to T in some 4 years. After I wrote this segment, I tried to get back in contact with her, but she didn't want to borrow me. I don't think that I was a bad friend, but I do wonder sometimes. These days, I reflect on how my youngest sibling is in year 11, the same age that I was then, and when I see them and their college friends, I literally cannot imagine what it was like for this adult man in his mid-20s to hang out with tiny teenagers. It makes me physically ill every time I go by my old college. The college of which has a reputation for teachers sleeping with the students. This story is not unique, and Rina gives voice to people like my friend T by singing.
I ain't a number you can ever divide. You cross the line by multiplying the lies. 'Cause I'm not a secret, and I'm not a problem. Why did you do it? What the hell were you thinking?
I've seen some people interpret this song as being about a parent lying about their child's sexuality. And I can see that. You know, songs are about multiple different things, dialectics. But this is so obvious to me. I know many young ladies who have been in relationships with older men who didn't have social media. I remember my old pal A. She learned that someone she'd been dating for months had assaulted previous exes and had moved states to avoid scorn. She broke up with him on the spot and shortly thereafter ended up in hospital because they had like a manic episode. I also remember my old friend M, and she told me about a date that she went on with a 23-year-old when she was 16. He told her that the age of consent in Tasmania was 16, which it isn't, it's 16 between 16-year-olds. And when I explained this to her, she was like, "Oh, whoops!" And then she sobbed her eyes out. Men like this prey on younger women because women their own age know that they are trouble. They prey on your sense of feeling like an adult. They prey on immaturity and sexual naivete. You don't know what's normal yet, and they use that against you. They also use social media to alienate their girlfriends, to separate them from their IRL friends, to further incubate feelings of abuse. If no one sees it, no one can point out how wrong it is, and if you can control who the partner sees, then the opportunity to break up with them never can arise. I helped T break up with her pedo boyfriend by looking at their messages and pointing out his manipulative behavior to her. All it takes is for one person to point this out to you, and that's why men like this guard who their younger victims speak to. This song seems to be in conversation with that mini story from Paradisen, where Rina's mother had to hack her MSN Messenger to keep her away from a much older man in a band.
Having these weird experiences like being hacked at one point in her life.
It wasn't even that sophisticated. My mum just guessed my or maybe I was logged into MSN Messenger and she just opened it and she's like, hey.
Lastly, thank you to my 17-year-old self for going through what she did. It took me to be this age to understand that you did nothing wrong. You were just a child. You didn't get justice. But know that you are not alone, and your pain will heal so many people around the world. I dedicate this record to her. So, I give Rina all the props in the world for going there and articulating these feelings. How cathartic they must be for someone who actually experienced them firsthand. I just wish the song was better. Fuck, I'm an asshole. I feel as if it would have been punchier if it was one verse shorter. I think it lingers on a little bit too long, although I can understand why that choice was made. This leg of the album represents an emotional spiral for Rina. All the darkest songs are clustered together, and they all have a different take on similarly depressed feelings. And I want to pause before I criticize all of these songs and acknowledge that Rina being angry and even vengeful on these songs is itself Fem-Asian praxis. She is not meek. She is assertive about her right to feel angry at the hands of misogyny and racism. Conceptually, it's badass. I'm going to argue that these songs are aesthetically dubious, but intellectually, all of these are powerful. I just wish that I could feel it instead of reading into it, if you catch my drift. Look who decided to come and visit! I'm gonna take your collar off because you are bothering me. You're free! Run! You silly cat. Imagining is kind of about psychosis and having to be on drugs to maintain one's mental state. On this track, which is overblown to the point of my ears hurting, Rina wallows in her own self-destruction. At least here the mixing conveys a sense of emotional chaos. I wish the structure of the song was less predictable though. It has this verse-chorus linearity to it, and I think the song would be elevated if it was more all over the place structure-wise. I said something similar as a positive before, so let's compare the two. Aka Sucker Sad is a song that is tied to the ground, and it flew around wildly, and its structure allowed you to perceive it easier. Imagining hasn't achieved a lift-off because the wind is so dull. I wanted there to be a bit more spice structurally to this song, and instead I can barely remember it because I think it's an ugly sounding song, but not to its own benefit. Once again, the vocal compression is wildly overblown, and although it is thematically appropriate here, it is not welcome to me. Next, we have one of the surprise singles off of the album, Frankenstein. I believe that Frankenstein is the yang to Hold the Girl's yin. Hold the Girl is about healing, whereas Frankenstein is about self-destruction. Thus, I have quite a lot to say about it. These two songs are about confronting who you used to be in a time before you had depression and during violence. But at its core, this latent nostalgia is for when things were easier. This feels like the next logical step after Snakeskin, where she actually talks about the how and the why nostalgia bites. Her nostalgia has reminded her of bad feelings, and the music video for Frankenstein reflects this love-hate relationship with nostalgia. The track itself is obviously an ode to Evanescence, with its melodrama and its soaring vocals backed with roaring detuned guitars. The lyrics also ruminate on pretending to be someone who you aren't, constructing your personality out of the elements of other people, elements that you don't like, that ultimately make up a Frankenstein's monster, so to speak. Rina is describing a disturbing dissociation from her own self. The music video, although straightforward, uses a lot of visual metaphors to expand on this concept, so I'm going to use it here as an aid. The video features a nervous Rina walking around a party where she doesn't seem to belong. The wide-angle lens and the blurred vignette effect on the camera stares into her eyes like it's attached to her. It makes for an unnerving movement that immediately conveys how she feels on the inside. Her posture is stiff and she chafes against the other partygoers. Our Rina is wearing light grey clothing, conveying how she feels dull herself. She takes refuge in the bathroom where she sees her own reflection, wearing black leather, piercings, more dramatic makeup and hair. This shadow leaps from the bathroom mirror and locks Rina inside. On a very fundamental level, Rina looks into the mirror and she doesn't recognize herself. It's a haunting image. The shadow forces herself into the party and the members like her. They start dancing immediately. We quite literally see Rina dissociating from herself. This literalism is contrasted with the emotional truth of the situation. Both of these readings run diagonal to one another, but much like a triangle, they touch at the end. So it's worth exploring both of them here. The literal depersonalization shows another person take over Rina's identity. In cases of trauma in children, they tend to form unhealthy attachments with their abusers, because children have the assumption that their guardians are always right, and because of this they find it difficult to square the abuse they have felt, feeling that they themselves must be to blame for said abuse. Sometimes they can externalize these feelings in unhealthy ways. According to scholar of trauma Dr. Judith Herman,
by developing a contaminated, stigmatized identity, the victim takes the evil of the abuser into herself and thereby preserves her primary attachments to her parents. Because the inner sense of badness preserves the relationship, it is not readily given up after the abuse has stopped. Rather, it becomes a stable part of the child's personality.
Externalizing traumatic feelings by describing oneself as dirty or inhuman is a common response for victims of abuse, and Rina literalizes this impulse with a different version of herself. This person comes out and traps Rina behind a locked door. She does things that, presumably, our Rina doesn't like doing, like pushing other people over or aggressively flirting with others, to the point that they might feel uncomfortable with her actions. A colleague of Herman's was Bessel van der Kolk. Remember him? He spends a lot of time in his book talking about how children go through traumatizing events, and how they react to their state of affairs. He speaks about a patient who had a terrible relationship with her mother, one in which the patient was unable to rely on her for anything when she was very young. Neglected children often have to deal with an unsolvable dilemma, according to van der Kolk.
Their mothers are simultaneously necessary for survival and a source of fear. They can neither approach the secure, ambivalent strategies, shift their attention, the avoidance strategy, nor flee. If you observe such children in a nursery school or attachment laboratory, you see them look towards their parents when they enter the room and then quickly turn away. Unable to choose between seeking closeness and avoiding the parents, they may rock on their hands and knees, appear to go into a trance, freeze with their arms raised, or get up to greet their parents and then fall to the ground. Not knowing who is safe and whom they belong to, they may be intensely affectionate towards strangers, or may trust nobody. This pattern disorganized attachment is fright without solution.
Rina seems to suffer from a disorganized attachment relationship with herself. She is affectionate with some strangers and violent to others. She continues to search for a point of comfortable attachment, but as we get into the second verse, we see this vignetting again. The shots become blurry. Serena starts removing her clothes to enhance her confidence, until she passes out and she's carried along by the other party members, culminating in this final shot of Rina being held up by all of her peers, everyone as dependent on her attention as she is on theirs. All of this represents how we wish to be seen, as more confident, more sexy, cooler than we actually are, and in pursuit of that feeling, we destroy what makes us special in the first place.
I was doing fine, till I hit rock bottom. Opened up my problems, watched the poison blossom.
The emotional depersonalization is much more painful. The lyrics read as a desperate need for validation, and this persona that Rina builds ends up eroding her actual sense of self. Of course, the persona is constructed piece by gory piece like Frankenstein's monster, held together by facial piercings. Metaphorically. Thematically, the song reminds me of one of my favorite books on the perils of human consciousness, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti, with his central thesis being that consciousness is ultimately a detriment to human well-being.
Isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation are among the wiles we use to keep ourselves from dispelling every illusion that keeps us up and running. Without this cognitive double-dealing, we would be exposed for what we are. It would be like looking into a mirror and for a moment seeing the skull inside our skin looking back at us with its sardonic smile, and beneath the skull, only blackness, nothing. Someone is there, so we feel, and yet no one is there. The uncanny paradox, all the horror in our glimpse. A little piece of our world has been peeled back, and underneath its creaking desolation, a carnival where all the rides are moving, but no patrons occupy the seats.
All I want is to feel beautiful, inside and out. You're the one that can save me from myself. Destruction 999, I need your help.
You behave like this and you destroy your actual person until you are stuck with the monster that you have become. And worse, someone might actually fall for this trick that you have pulled, falling in love with your false sense of self, and then you have to continue the facade.
Put me together, make me better. Love me forever, hold me tight. I can be your Frankenstein.
Sawayama manages to capture Thomas Ligotti, Vonnegut's Mother Night, the hedgehog problem, and the terror of knowing herself, all in 3 minutes and 13 seconds. And yet it's utterly ruined by the terrible mixing on the song. So this is one of 2 tracks in the album where I desperately wish that Clarence Clarity was just not involved. The industrial tinted drums hurt my ears terribly with their monotonous repetition and their blast beat intensity. On my computer speakers, they are tolerable, but get yourself like a decent set of headphones and listen to this track. It sincerely hurts. I do have pretty sensitive hearing. I can hear mouth repellent machines, and those give me migraines. And I know it's not just my headset because when I saw her live, I got such a headache from Frankenstein that I had to move to the back of the venue. Let's compare the compression on this track to This Hell, a song that I like quite a lot. Both tracks have compressed guitars and overblown instrumentals. The chorus on Frankenstein features the compressed drums, some minor hints of synth, and Rina's vocals. That's it really. We have to focus on the vocals alone, so as a listener it feels like we have Rina in a void and she's singing out, and the vocals are so compressed that it actually complements the feelings of isolations laid bare in the lyrics. But because the drums hurt your ears, it makes the chorus hard to listen to because there isn't much else to focus on, even if the performance of the vocals are pleasant. There's also this synth fog that clouds the mix, which normally I'm a fan of. But because it's so compressed, it sounds unintentionally glitchy. It's like the song's been skinnamarink. It's like watching VHS on your 4K TV with your amazing surround sound speakers. This is accentuated with the synth bass lines on the song, which I do think sound good. It lingers down in the bottom of the mix with the drums, giving the song some bite. With all of these elements with differing levels of quality, the mix as a whole sounds so confusing to my brain that I can't quite make heads or tails to it. Each part feels ripped from a different songs. Individual parts work, but holistically, it's messy. It pains me to say it, but Clarity's kooky style of mixing makes everything else fall apart when it should sound cohesive, which is a shame because of how serious the lyrics are. Clarity is excellent at making these hulking post-internet hyperpop songs. The compression usually creates the impression of psychedelia, and the nostalgic nods to Evanescence and Justin Timberlake here don't mesh well with Clarity's style of production. Contrast this with This Hell, where Rita's vocals have autotune on them, and thus they give off an impression of reverb, and the mix is full of less intense drums, flirty synth notes, and guitar hits. The whole song sounds cohesive, fuller, and each element feels part of a larger whole. Thus, my brain is able to buy into a sonic sense of verisimilitude. And then I do my gay little square dance. Ultimately, I like songs that have iffy mixes. I've expressed my love for black metal on this channel, and most of those songs are mixed terribly. But the difference with Frankenstein is that I can't help but focus on the fashion drums. The entire piece is peaks and valleys. I like the synths on the post-chorus. I think they're very pretty. I also think the refrain, "I don't wanna be a monster anymore," is a pretty good hook. It's been in my head all day while I've been filming this, but I get really annoyed by Rina's background vocals, twirling through the thin mixing. I don't agree with the needle drop very often, but his assessment of the song being a clarity experiment gone wrong resonates with me. I find this to be an appropriately spooky song about self-destruction, but the mix ruins any kind of enjoyment for me, which is such a shame because I can actually pick this one out of a lineup. It feels like one of the few ideas I actually had for a beat, and it's so strangely executed. The message of the entire song seems to be that nostalgia gets in the way of progress, and ironically, with the song itself being a nostalgic ode to Evanescence and nu metal, it itself sounds like a fight between conflicting parts. Unfortunately, I don't think this was part of the artistic intention of this piece, it's just badly mixed. Chapter 8, Sending Love. I feel quite similarly with how Hurricanes was produced, except the entire song has been compressed into a brick and has been thrown at my stupid fat head. The final mix of Hurricanes is genuinely so compressed that I find it difficult to figure out where the guitars start and the synths end. It sounds like a poor quality MP3 downloaded from LimeWire. I think that this is the point. Like, it sounds so incredibly mid-2000s, and the production represents this. It's a Kelly Clarkson radio rock tinged ode to cradling your inner child. But it sounds so awful that I don't even want to take a deep dive into this track. It re-explores many of the same themes from earlier in the album, with an extra focus on finding God, or at least a person of higher significance that you really want approval from. But it's so compressed that I can't really make out what Rina's singing. I do appreciate the allusions to getting out of a tumultuous period of mental ill health, the April showers making way for warmer weather. And with its imagery of a storm passing, I think it's appropriately placed after the emotional chaos of the previous 3 songs. But this song needed another draft. It sounds like a demo. It sounds like I've put it in Handbrake and I've just compressed it down to like 1 megabyte when it was 10. The entire song is meant to feel like a monumental emotional moment, but the compression, well, compresses it so significantly that it doesn't feel monumental at all. It gives me a bigger headache than Frankenstein, and I find it genuinely unlistenable with headphones. I didn't mind the live version of the song, with musicians playing the guitars and drums, even if the synth backing track still sounds compressed. We quite suddenly shift into one of the most gorgeously produced and performed songs Rina has ever made.
Oh, the song I'm most excited for my fans to hear. Very, very personal song about a friend. Kind of, I would say it's like a chosen family, but it's the parents' perspective, and it's probably one of the songs that I've written that I'm most proud of in terms of like songwriting. I was really able to tell the story that I wanted with that one.
The stunning Send My Love to John. I genuinely get chills whenever I think about it. When I saw her live, Rina explained that she wrote this song from the perspective of a homophobic parent, someone who had been cut off by their child, and she says that she based the title off of a supposed message one of her friends got. The friend in question's homophobic mother suddenly sends her love to his partner. And this intimate singer-songwriter track is perfectly complemented with the crisp recording of the acoustic guitar, along with the twangy hits of synth and the minimal percussion. A detail that I love in the mix is that for most of the song there isn't much manipulation on Rina's voice.
And I'm sorry for the things I've done. I misguided love to my only son.
But when we get to the third verse, in which the mother laments that she should have supported her son for his bullying, but he hid behind the Bible to justify it, Rina's voice gets a hint of autotune, suggesting that she is taking on an element of manipulation.
Ooh, but all you needed was my love.
Then when the next chorus hits, the line, "I misguided love to my only son," gets an entirely new meaning, and this is further reinforced with the autotune. It is a well and truly brilliant artistic choice that enhances the emotion of the song. It's moments like this on the album which deepen my frustration, because it shows that great work is still being done on this album, and it makes the low points seem lower, especially after Hurricanes. Gorgeously produced song, Hurricanes. I'll be honest with you. When I wrote this final chapter, it was meant to be a critique about the commodification of queerness on this record. And by all accounts, it was not good. I maintain that Sawayama feels wrong to me. Like, I don't think that white queers should distort her name because it's something that she struggled to love. But ultimately, the segment that I wrote was raw. It came from a place inside of me that still struggles with my own sexuality. And it came across as angry and contemptuous. So I want to thank my many script editors on this project for encouraging me to get over myself and ultimately make the video better, because I don't feel that way about this album. I mentioned briefly how the fans at the concert annoyed me, and I just wanted to state plainly, the gays deserve to be a bit annoying. The backlash against gay marriage and the increasing hostility towards trans people only grows worse by the day. At the time of writing, fascist TERF Posey Parker has been touring Australia and New Zealand, with actual neo-Nazis showing up doing Hitler salutes. Openly fascist calls to reduce the number of trans people are slowly becoming normalised and being considered worthy of debate. And that is wrong. They won't stop at trans people. And we need to affirm trans rights and protect them. They are worthy of respect, and I love my trans friends dearly. I think at the core of my frustration with the fandom was primarily about how they don't engage with the smarter elements of Rina's music. And after reflection, I think that the perspective I wanted to get across was that I want you to think more about the art that you're consuming. Instead of letting it casually wash over you, engage with the academia. The album sounds like dumb fun and they engage with it casually. And I was going to link that to the capitalism commodification of queerness in a peculiar type of virtue signaling that I'd seen, like, this album is good because it's gay. You know, liking it because it affirms you, not because it's aesthetically valuable. But upon reflection, I'm not that upset about it. You know, like, I think about bands like Nirvana, where they were really popular, but they were overtly political. You know, Kurt Cobain was a feminist and an anti-racist. I nearly called him a racist, that would have been bad. And I think about all the people who listened to his music and completely skipped over the social messages and were just like racist misogynists. And this notion contradicted my praise of Sawayama aiming for the #1 hit. Like, in reaching the top of the charts, Rina will be diffusing social messages to those who care, and this creates a normalization of ideas once considered to be fringe. I wanted to end this essay by affirming that as an artistic goal. Rina is hacking the West with Techno-Orientalism, and she is performing her own form of Fem-Asian praxis. If this album resonated with you, please treasure that. Cradle that gift that Rina gave you. It is so important that Send My Love for John and Chosen Family resonated with so many, and only Rina could have written those songs in the way that she did. It is a major artistic achievement. I beg of you, be annoying about your love. Loudly affirm it in public and engage with your joy, while I sit over here like a grumpy little guy. Rina deserves to express queerness in her own terms. That is more important than my subjective dislike of the last leg of this record. The final 2 tracks on the album sound monotonous, and they don't really wrap up the themes as much as I would like them to. The refrain of "flowers still look pretty when they're dying on To Be Alive" is seen by many as Sawayama making peace with herself. Like, she's finding beauty in all the parts of herself that she once hated. But to me, this refrain is ghoulish. She remains transfixed on things that have died, on nostalgia, on suffering, on death. Instead of looking forward, it feels like the protagonist of this album, whatever version of Rina this is, can't let go of bad times. And it's very upsetting to me. We return again and again to Sawayama cradling her inner child and trying to connect with her. Like, that's what this album cover is about, right? Like, her body has become swollen by all of this trauma, and with the elongated nails and her being further away from the camera, it communicates an element of performance. If I had known what had happened to Sawayama when she was younger, it might have made the album more cutting. But it would have made her audience uncomfortable. And you don't want your audience to be uncomfortable when you write a house record. The second half of this video has been quite negative, and I don't want to give the impression that I hate this album, because I sincerely don't. To me, it's peaks and valleys. It has great mountaintops, loads of mediocre plains, and some particularly terrible pits. I have no desire to listen to it again, and to me that's worse than it being plainly bad. Like I said, I wanted to make this video because I hope that by thinking really hard about this album, I could come to a much stronger conclusion about Hold the Girl. Like, finally I'd get it, or I'd feel this strong hatred for it. But I feel meh. Nonplussed, honestly, because there's nothing super interesting about it. You can like it because it spoke to you about the queer experience, and that's valid. But I just ask you to ask yourself, was the album about that? Or was it just part of it? Like, does this album invoke justice to fight against it? Or did it just remind you of your traumas? Which one is more constructive exactly? You can like parts of the album, but intrinsically an album has to be a holistic experience. The album isn't an interrogation about queerness and identity, but sometimes it is. And they are two different elements of the album taped together by a vague sense of trauma. Trauma that is scored by a bland musical palette. Rina just repeats the same few motifs over and over again until they begin to lose meaning. I wish I had access to the fans' love, but I just don't feel anything here. And as I said, it's the paradox that's what compelled me to write this video. We ruminate on the inner child, on shame, on guilt, and we don't really move beyond those emotions to a state of contented happiness. The digitization of her body, as described by Kuoch and Wang, was supposed to be emancipatory. And now she's just been commodified, and I find it incredibly sad. Rina is extremely online, and, maybe there's a big flight that she has to take, so there's a small chance that she might see this. I want to say one thing. I truly love your work. Your debut album got me through a particularly nasty breakup in 2022. I've never had my heart broken more by anything in my life, and you made me feel happy and made me reflect on the things that I actually valued. As I said at the top of this video, Sawayama is the album to beat this decade for me. But my parting words are this: you really do not have to mind your suffering for our entertainment. I appreciate Hold the Girl from a distance, and I really respect how it has resonated with a wider audience. Your goal to heal your fans is a noble one. Anyone who is able to create music at all deeply impresses me. But I hope that you don't feel the compulsion to continue picking at closed wounds. And after this album cycle is over, I wish you nothing but better health and greater peace of mind. Your art is already so clever and so important. I know so many young queers who find your work inspirational. It means a lot to them and to me. That's my conclusion, and I want to thank the audience for watching this video. I can't say it like that. I imagine the comments underneath this one were going to be pretty spicy, so I wanted to let you know that I encourage spirited debate and I am open to critiques about my work. I only wish to get better at what I do. I try to make more analytical essays than reviews. If it was a review, both of these albums would be worth your money. But before writing this, I just couldn't get it out of my head, so I wrote it to get it out of my mind. I had to bring a lot of my own subjectivity into this one to explain my complicated feelings. I hope that I haven't come across as a salty fan who just wanted the debut album again, because I definitely don't. I don't like making negative critiques of art, but this was a thorn in my side and I just had to write it to get rid of it. I believe that Rina could supersede Sawayama one day, but not if she stays in the past and sells us all Snakeskin. Thank you very much for watching.